We're recording. Okay. Hello, people. Today, Fanny Anzai interviews Fanny Anzai, Brazilian physician turned YouTuber, interviewing Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber. Thank you very much, Viva, for coming.
My pleasure, Fanny. How you doing?
I'm doing okay, and you?
Good, good. I'm in my dungeon in the basement, which is where I get the quiet time. But there's no air conditioning, so it's a little hot down here.
I can imagine. Canada is burning hot. It's fantastic. And I'm happy that you were there without AC, better than in the car, I guess. No?
Well, I
For
was in
now?
I was in the car this morning with the windows down. It was cool enough, but I was shooting the content for the McCloskey vlog, the indictment explained, and the newest developments in that situation because it's phenomenal. That's going to be going on for a while, and there's going to be amazing stuff to learn in law from that situation. It's outrageous.
I
But we'll
guess I guess this is super exclusive. I hope I can release this video before you release yours so people can already be waiting.
I should get mine out by 5 o'clock this afternoon. That's how fast I move.
Okay, now I might release mine earlier because at 5 I'll probably be working. So, Viva Frei, for those who not know, Viva Frei, lawyer, YouTuber, and I will kind of go over your personal description on your Twitter. Short award and GoPro winner.
Yeah,
What is
so
that? Maniac?
well, I said I'm a GoPro maniac. Shorty Award. There's this internet awards. It's like call it the Oscars of the internet, but maybe not really. Well, it might be like the Oscars. It's just internet recognition awards, and I got a Shorty Award. They have a category for social good, and it was basically my YouTube channel, which was contributing to the aggregate knowledge to some extent of the internet. That's sort of how I pitched it when I submitted, and I won an award in that a couple of years ago. And the GoPro Award was for some of my older internet work where I put a little piece of bread on a GoPro, and the squirrel took a GoPro up a tree. One of those, which was the coolest one ever, the squirrel was like running through the branches of the trees with the GoPro, perfectly angled, so it was just like first person view of a squirrel. People were calling it parkour, and the squirrel was jumping from branch to branch. Anyways, GoPro gave me an award for that, $500, and the title GoPro Award winner. And what else? Drone enthusiast, I think, is up there. Annoying husband. Uh,
Cool dad, annoying husband. And that was my joke. Is like, which husband is not annoying?
there's levels, and if there's a spectrum of annoying versus super duper mega annoying, I'm certainly on the super duper side.
I guess because you can cover all the annoying parts because you're a lawyer. I imagine the worst part is the arguing with a husband that is also a lawyer.
No, no, no. I think the most annoying part for me is the constant hyperactivity and short attention span, the need for constant stimulation. To the point where the kids get tired of trying to chase
I,
me around.
I totally relate to that. Actually, it's something people came to complain on my YouTube channel because it's still very small. It's under 1,000 subs, and people come and see all this stuff, crafting and talking about matching process in Canada and immigration and tourism and interviewing people and all my subjects and topics around me. And they're like, "What a weird person in
Well,
video game." And it's like, well, I guess people are weird. As smarter they are, they gonna manipulate and like more concepts and things, and they get complicated. Yeah.
no, I would call that eclectic, but I'd say from the only issue from YouTube perspective, I found with my channel that once you niche down and you get your
Thing.
raison d'être, I would call it a niche for lack of a better word. That's when it becomes easier for YouTube to know how to deal with your channel. People coming, they know what they're going to get. That's why I was like, I used to do cooking videos, fishing videos, drone videos, and then I just discovered over time that people had an interest in the law side. Even though at the beginning I thought it was boring and I wanted to get out of law, but life is something of a circle sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. So you mean you were eccentric just because of that, the beginning of being like all this collective of yourself
Well,
showing up.
I'm eccentric I'm in my hardwire. I'm eccentric. But when I started the YouTube channel, it was not law related. I was running obstacle course races in a suit and tie, lip syncing Miley Cyrus. Then I was putting up squirrel videos. Then I got a GoPro, and And it's only over time that, at first I used it as sort of like what I called a cathartic relief from the practice of law. I did it for creativity, to keep myself sort of sane outside of the practice. And then when I wanted to sort of stop practicing law, it merged together perfectly. So I said, well, I have interest in these legal current stories, trying to understand what's going on in the world. And I found that whenever I made a video about that, explaining the law of what we read around us, people liked it. So that's how I got to where I am. And so far, touch wood, it's surviving. We're doing well.
That's right. Oh, it's doing great. When did you decide to become a lawyer originally? From all this hyperactivity, how did you pick specifically that to be?
I say this, that there was no family pressure and there's no but. My dad never pressured us to become lawyers. I was told at 8 years old, I'm going to make a great lawyer. And it was part of being an argumentative, defiant kid, where I wasn't exactly the best student. I got in a lot of trouble for the better part of my childhood. And, as an 8-year-old kid in grade 3 or 2, maybe grade 3, I mean, teachers are telling me, David, I know you're going to be a great lawyer one day, or you're going to be a lawyer, maybe not a great, some great lawyer. Others just said you're going to be a lawyer. And that was it. It was just sort of, there was no real question. I didn't study science in Cégep or university. So even if I wanted to be a vet, too late for that. Studied creative arts in Cégep, for those who know what it is. Studied philosophy at McGill. Did an exchange with La Sorbonne in Paris. And I knew from philosophy I was going to go into law. From law, I was probably going to practice. And I did. That's where it went. But we're 5 kids. 4 of the 5 kids turned out to be lawyers. Of the kids, 3 of the spouses are lawyers. My dad's a lawyer. In-laws are lawyers. We're a family of lawyers. We certainly have increased the lawyer population.
That's nice. I actually have thought of being a lawyer at some point. Before getting in university, I was like, I could be a lawyer or a doctor, or I could be both. I even thought of going through both graduations at some point and being a legal doctor. And I did do a lot of practice in the legal institute in the end of university. And I love the ontology. It's amazing. I really got good scores and spent a lot of time reading a lot of law.
No, I only make the face because in hindsight, I probably would have gone into medicine. Law as a practice is a soul crushing practice. It's constant 24/7 stress. I say, like, when you lose, you lose. When you win, you lose. But knowing the law in retrospect is knowing how to view the law and how to think critically is invaluable. I say, in hindsight, everybody should study law for a bit, even if they don't want to practice, just so they can learn how to argue, learn how to process information. But as a career, probably more value added in being a doctor than a lawyer.
I don't know, because today is very important to know your vlog. Oh, sorry, to know your law, your law. I got your know your vlog. So that was the next topic. To how did you become the vlogger and then YouTuber? Was just trying to distance yourself from the law, become a podcaster, something like that, or
It's
vlogger.
I started doing the vlogging when I said I was going to wind up litigation. I had a sort of a vision of a career in marketing or working with a marketing agency. So I said, I'll wind up my litigation practice. And when I did that, I think it was about 2016 or 2017, we went on a road trip. It was the longest vacation I've ever taken, 3 weeks, maybe 2.5 to 3 weeks, whatever. And I was just vlogging every day. And so I said, I'm going to vlog every day from the trip, because we were going to California. It was going to be a British Columbia, California, whatever, West Coast. And I said, I'm going to do a vlog every day. It was California. Went to Death Valley. We went to Las Vegas. And every day I did a video, put it out the same day. And I said, when I got back, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. And it's sort of like a Casey Neistat thing. And so every day for 2 years, I put out a video, not law related at all. Cooking, fishing, short videos, long videos, whatever. And that, in retrospect, understanding my life backwards, that I honed how to edit. I honed the skill, the technical skills of just making a video. And in the course of doing that, every now and again, I put out a law video. So when I had a trial, I put out a law video documenting that, and I noticed people liked it. Like, oh, a lot of comments. I've always wanted to be a lawyer. This gives me some insight as to what it's like. Do more of these. And so then it just veered that way. And I started doing more and more, but by no means daily law stuff. And then it was when I did that Alex Jones analysis of the deposition video. That was really what convinced me that this is the direction I have to go as a channel, and this is the value that I bring to the world. It's you know the concept of ikigai. It's the Japanese concept of ikigai, where it's an overlapping Venn diagram. There's what the world needs, what I'm good at, what I can make money at, and what makes me happy. And when those overlap, the four overlap is what I'm good at, what makes the world, but what the world wants, what I can make money doing because you have to survive, and what makes me happy. Law vlogs ended up being that overlapping section of the Venn diagram. And so I've been doing that since solid now since 2018. And I've got like 1,700 videos now on YouTube, and easily 1,000 of which are the law vlogs.
That's right. And the dogs were like something very into the transition still.
Well,
the kissing the dog.
You
Because
can't.
the kissing the dog was like, for me, that in the line, I'm like, okay.
Well, I've always loved dogs, and I've always grown up with dogs. So it's a tough thing to try to do a video a day and try to cut out your entire life, your, let's say, personal life. You cannot segregate your life from daily videos because they interfere, and then you can sort of try to create a sort of an artificial barrier between the two. I just found it easier to let them overlap naturally, not excessively, but I can't hide them. So when they overlap, they overlap. And when the kids run down when I'm doing a live stream with Barnes, it happens when we hear them in the background. It happens, and if I can get some quiet time in the bathroom or now the car, that also works. But it's impossible to fully take out your actual life from what
When
you
you
want.
have a family, at least.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think that is something people manage to do. I see a lot of YouTubers that take a room in their house and they make a studio. I've considered that because it is stressful to have a noisy environment and try to do to apart. In the beginning, I considered to make completely free from family, but it's just like you mentioned, it's impossible when you actually have more people in the house and the family when.
I think anybody who doesn't have kids might not be able to fully appreciate it. It's impossible. You can't. You have your space, and you can. I made an office in the basement and delineated it with pink duct tape. Kids are not allowed in here. You should see what it looks like now. So I've given up. The car has become, oddly enough, the best place to do the videos. We're going to see what happens in winter, but for the time being, it's working.
No, I think it's love. I actually love your channel having that personal part of your. It's not too much. It's not intrusive. And I think people appreciate and understand. At least the ones that stick around. And as you mentioned, I think it's natural that would end up with your expertise being the one to stand out for the audience, because then comes to what I mentioned to you. I started following you on the law videos, and it was for me because you were talking about things that everybody was talking about, but then you had the authority to be a lawyer. For me, that was what weighed more for me to stay. And of course, I love your style.
Well, it's this funny thing is like it's the authority. I wouldn't call it the authority because I would call it the authority in interpreting, not the authority in the knowledge. Because there's a lot. I'm a Quebec attorney. I know nothing, or at least I knew nothing about some of these issues, which is why it was fun for me to actually learn it. I knew nothing, but I could know how to read what I was reading. I could know the questions that people should be asking. And I remember the Alex Jones one was very easy for me to do in a sense because it was just critical thinking. It's how you approach a deposition. I didn't get into procedure or law in it. It was just literally tactics, style, demeanor during a deposition. But it was the Jussie Smollett saga where I'm sitting here asking myself, I'm a lawyer. How the heck do the charges just get dropped? And so, I have a network of lawyer friends and lawyer family. So I call up an in-law in Florida, and it's like, what is this pretrial diversion? And then I don't have to have an expertise in it to be able to understand it. And in a way, it's almost better that I don't, because I think I'm able to then break it down in a manner that is not legalese, so that it can be understood by myself and then in turn by others. And so it's the thing I always say about being a lawyer is it's not about knowing the answers. It's just about knowing the questions to ask. And when it comes to these issues, these current events, some people, it's not their fault, and it's not a question of intelligence or lack of intelligence. Some people just don't even know the questions to ask because they don't have that reflex. They don't have the knowledge of the legal system in general and how it might apply mutatis mutandis under other circumstances or other jurisdictions. But so I have that reflex as a lawyer, and then it's just a question of applying the strategy to everything. And it go, understanding Jussie Smollett, understanding what's going on in Michael Flynn, knowing where to look a little deeper, where my understanding is superficial, and if my understanding is superficial, so too is probably 90% of the people out there. So
yeah, I think it is that what you meant. Everybody, independent of knowing or not the law, we all want to know the truth, and we want to know what are the biases, what are the good evidence and bad, and sometimes we're just being manipulated by informations that are thrown on the mainstream media, sometimes not even truth, and that becomes like a common knowledge. Oh, everybody knows, I don't know, Trump is racist or homophobic. It's like, okay, citation needed or some evidence of that, or how you link that clearly.
Well, I started the Fake News Fridays series, but I mean, I move it into just regular law, but it is a question of reading things analytically and understanding. I mean, I said it in a few videos already. To be able to distinguish opinion from fact is already difficult, because sometimes they are so subtly intertwined or disguised. And so, yeah, you have people reading the news like myself, and where when you don't have that reflex, when you don't have that cynicism, for lack of a better word, it's like, okay, I just read a fact, not appreciating that it's actually an opinion cloaked as a fact. And then you read facts, but you need to understand what's missing from this. What are the next layers of the information that I need? And the easiest one, as an example, is the Michael Flynn saga, where everybody, and it was my understanding as well, so it's not a question of knowledge or intelligence. It's just a question of understanding, and it's a question of not knowing the additional facts that you need to know. Michael Flynn, everybody knows he pleaded guilty, end of story. And it's at that point, with that limited knowledge, that people don't even know that there's stuff they need to know to even add to, undermine, or at the very least complement that other piece of knowledge. And that's what I hope I'm bringing with these vlogs. I hope I'm not, the topics I tend to pick, I can see the majority, they tend to be what some might consider to be right-wing topics or conservative topics, but it's only the dynamic of the mainstream media, which is dominated by left-wing media. So the only stories that complement that balance are the ones that are on the other side. But I do hope that I don't, to the extent I have any bias, that it doesn't affect my judgment. I don't think it does, but I am always open to criticism if people think it does, but with facts and citations needed.
Definitely, yeah. I think that is the important thing. You wrote 2-3 days ago on your Twitter something I loved, and I wrote down here to say that is like, more dangerous than honest ignorance is dishonest intelligence. And I think that is something we can sometimes, if you're following the news, you can see sometimes people are doing that, manipulating emotions to try to, for example, this year, manipulate votes in the United States, and talk about all this political bias that you actually have done a lot of recent tweets about. So let's go over some cases. I wanted to mention before that you have really nice videos with colleagues. I started watching you when you made the video about the Convion boy and MAGA hat with the native guy.
Yep.
The old native guy that seems to be a professional victim. And then, you want to talk a little bit about that?
No. So the individual's name is Nathan Phillips, but that Covington case,
Yeah.
the thing. Other than being the video that introduced me to another YouTube lawyer, Nate Brody, and if anybody that story, that's
Yeah.
a story because, like I say, I enjoy being called out. I don't take offense to it, and so I did a video on the Covington kid because and I think I forget what the actual disagreement was, but I predicted that that this motion to dismiss the case was not going to be granted. And then Nate Brody, another YouTube lawyer, said I was wrong, and he said, here's why I think he's wrong. And then I did a response video to him as a joke. And then we ended up talking to each other in real life and became good friends. But that Covington Catholic kid case, the Covington Catholic kids case, was really, if it wasn't the eye-opener for me, because I was already getting skeptical at that point, it was the eye-opener for a lot of people out there as to how nefarious first impressions can be when the narrative is controlled by the media. And even say now, take terms like narrative out. When the media gets it wrong, for deliberately or accidentally, one is always left with the initial impression, and it's extremely hard to get past or get rid of that impression. It's almost like a form of trauma, where even it takes conditioning to get away from that trauma of an initial experience. And there are still people who I know who I consider to be smart, intelligent, sensitive, emotional, reasonable people who still have negative feelings about this Nick Sandman kid, a kid they've never met who was 16 years old at the time, and they have negative feelings about him, and they don't have the insight or the introspection to appreciate that the only logical explanation for how someone who can have negative feelings for someone they've never met who's a kid at the time, and they're basing it all on as a 30-second clip or just a photograph, they don't appreciate that is the conditioning effect of first reporting. That's where I think some argumentative pressure might be required, but it's an amazing thing. People just don't appreciate how they can be conditioned and how their fundamental opinions are influenced by the initial stories they get, even if they turn out to be wrong.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a little bit of that. I think it comes back to a little bit of the mindset, because I actually saw you talk to Cernovich as well.
Yeah.
I just after I talked to him, you talked to him, and yeah, I think it comes back to the mainstream media, the fake news, how these actually manipulate people emotionally and blinds them from even going farther and acknowledging that the first report was wrong. And it impedes them to find out the truth in the end.
There's two things. People, like Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. And even the way people digest information is dictated and influenced by their preferred sources. And it's a funny thing with Cernovich. I was not reluctant. I was scared to interview him because I didn't know how people would react. Only because the only thing I knew of Cernovich at the time was the way he was depicted or portrayed in the media by certain outlets. Ooh, something just happened upstairs, but whatever. I hear no crying, so I don't have to run. And
it's just something broken.
Something fell down, but and it's an amazing thing, and I realized that I too am a victim of it. Where I the only thing I know of certain people are what I read in the media. The media it is just a fact. It's largely dominated by certain ideologies, and the similar experience when I went on RT. I have a lot of people who I like, who I respect and consider reasonable people. Think, why go on RT? It's Russian propaganda. I was like, it's no more Russian propaganda than CNN is American propaganda, or left-leaning propaganda. More than every outlet will have an agenda, and that's not to discredit the outlet as a whole. Rather, it's to approach it with a certain degree of skepticism in terms of what they're telling you, and so. There's still legitimate news coming out of CNN, but there's still a lot of politicized nonsense coming out of CNN because of the narrative and the agenda that they have, and you just have to know it. I'd go on CNN just as quickly as I'd go on RT, just as quickly as I'd go on Fox. But it is this expectation that's created by the public impression that does have an influence and does impose pressure on even, I think, free-spirited people like myself.
For sure. Yeah, and it's funny because the Commodore case was what brought me to your channel, and then I saw you talking to Nate Brody, and then later and who is sticking right now. And I think you guys should make a third show together because it's amazing. You and Barnes together are amazing. And I hope I can talk to Barnes in the future. So we're not going to go through the Flynn case, even if it's amazing case and talks a lot of the political biases. But I will let us talk about political biases when we get to the last and most recent of your videos, that the McCloskeys,
Oh,
and you're making a video
yeah.
later today about it?
Yeah, I'm doing this video today because there's been developments where, the initial indictment was itself news. Public statements from the circuit attorney have also added some news to that. Turns out today that apparently the pistol that was seized from Patricia McCloskey was not functional. It was not operable when seized, and it was rendered operable in the context of the investigation. So very amazing things in there, because you have issues of, on
She
the one
was
hand,
just like a 007 girl
yeah,
holding
well,
a gun. I was just so lucky from that,
a lot of
like
people
the
pointing out.
reference.
Oh yeah, well no, there's no question. It was the pictures that came out are they are now part
I
of.
love the memes.
Yeah, the one where they substituted the weapons for a banjo and a microphone was quite funny. But no, apparently people on the internet were complaining about her gun, the way she handled the gun, and that she had her finger on the trigger. Apparently knowing that it was allegedly inoperable then might explain the way she was holding it. But how it goes from being inoperable to operable after investigation to press charges is interesting. Why it's interesting as well, because of the way the legislation or the laws are drafted. So without spoiling too much of that, that's what's in the vlog.
Yeah,
This law, fact,
go
critical.
check.
Yeah.
Go check Viva Frei on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. You everywhere, huh?
On Parlor. I think I'm on
Oh
Parlor.
yeah, it is. I actually, I believe I made a profile. I just did not upload anything, but everybody's going there,
Yeah,
I guess.
it's pretty popular. It's the funny thing is, someone actually, I'm fairly certain, unless I'm totally senile, and created this account a year ago, which I don't think is the case. Somebody created an account, Viva Frei, put in some description, and I was able to get that handle. But on Parlor, I am the Viva Frei. Twitter is the Viva Frei. Instagram is Viva Frei. But YouTube and Twitter and Parlor now are sort of my go-to places to make the content and then get the information.
And so with Barnes, you talking to him all the time, and you guys actually talk to and about sometimes legal ego. Let's not talk about it. Don't think we have anything good to talk about.
I have nothing against illegal.
I love Barnes stopping the video just to say something, and then everybody starts to say, okay, he's going to say something important. He's like, just to say, legal ego isn't needed. Like, what? I love
I genuinely have nothing against legal because now I know how to approach legal's information. It is, and incidentally, I would love to have a discussion with legal. I would have legal on any. You remind me, I have a tweet draft that I saved a while back that I have to publish, but I would have a discussion with legal any day of the week. I don't think that's a mutual feeling, but I think that's the dynamic of the internet. But no, legal. He gets some facts right, and then he applies them with his own perspective, which, as far as I'm concerned, illustrates the difference between bias and either the balance of bias or neutralizing bias. But when I was watching legal's assessment on the impeachment, evidence, hearsay evidence, shifts, comments before Congress, you can see in real time the illustration of what effect bias can have on the manner in which someone processes and dispenses information.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I was going to say Barnes is amazing in the sense that whether or not he has a bias, because he has his political beliefs, he can nonetheless, and this is the exercise, this is the skill, he can nonetheless see it from both sides. He can just, he will not agree necessarily with both sides.
Yeah. And I think that is something you mentioned in one of your recent tweets as well, because you have to stick with the principles and the fundamentals, and you have to apply them on both sides. If you actually use some type of double standard, that is what we see on the political bias. When it happens from one side, it's ignorance. Oh, we have to forgive. We have to be forgiving. And when it comes from the other side, oh, he's a liar and he's doing that too dishonestly.
apparently the term already exists, political confirmation bias, but it is the very idea that like when that was in reference to the Trump news that he's been inconsistent on the use of masks. Fact check, false. I mean, okay, that's, and I said, well, first of all, if someone consistently follows inconsistent advice, are they consistent or inconsistent? I mean, that's the catch-22. And the whole issue about it is, the answer is what you want. If someone consistently follows inconsistent advice, then they're inconsistent if you want to criticize them, or they're consistent if you want to praise them. And it goes both ways. But it's just the fundamentally biased way of viewing it, where it's a mistake if your friends do it, it's a lie if your foes do it. And that's, and the other fundamental mistake is deliberately mischaracterizing or strawmanning your foes' arguments so you can then demonize them in 140 characters on Twitter, which, you know, and it gets the clicks, but it gets clicks, it gets fights, it gets people tweeting and commenting, but it doesn't actually do anything to contribute to any form of understanding.
That's so right. So kind of like leaving a little bit, we're going to go back to the political biases. I wanted to mention another subject more into perspective to get to today's what you're talking about. Another special case was the Jussie Smollett that you actually cover a lot, and I think everybody was just so into it. I feel like Jussie is still a meme nowadays because the hoax crimes did not stop. No, it just became more popular after him.
What became, well, Jussie became a meme. It became a meme on the one hand. Dave Chappelle is the one who solidified the meme of the French actor Jussie Smollett, but it became a meme just because of how outlandish the entire situation was, and it also became the personification. Or maybe that's not the right word. The perfect embodiment or example of political corruption, selective prosecution, treating your friends different than you treat your enemies, and the politicizing of the legal judicial process. I mean, it's the symbol of politicizing a process.
Not to even say that. What would be that the Jussie Smollett case was a little bit too easily forgotten or too fast forgotten because of these maybe the connections that would find
I think it's just
on politics.
I don't think the collective memory in general is a short collective memory. But one thing's for certain is you're not going to have, once it became known that it was a hoax, according to, alleged hoax, because it still hasn't been proven in a court of law. So I know what I believe. I know what Chicago Police Department believes. Once it became clear that it was a hoax, because the media is dominated by a certain narrative that was much more interested in it when it was believed to be a vulnerable situation.
If it was truth,
if it was true,
much more interesting. Yeah,
much more interesting to the bulk of mainstream media, which leans left. And I'm saying this without judgment. It's just the way the world is, at least in America. So once it became a hoax or a known hoax, every media outlet that was reporting on it became embarrassed. It no longer fit their political purposes. And so they just, it fell off the face of the earth, primarily, I think, because they were all very embarrassed that they all went hook, line, and sinker without testing what many people were, many critical thinkers were testing right from day one. Nothing about the story really makes sense. People wearing MAGA hats in the middle of the night during a cold cyclone in Chicago. The premise doesn't really make much sense, but it was so juicy, no pun intended, that the media just went with it. When it became known as a hoax, then they just drop it and they try to bury it because it's embarrassing. And so that affects collective memory as well. So I don't keep bringing it up to rehash the ugly memory. It just keeps taking legal turn developments, which are fascinating. You had the charges being dropped. So there's the pretrial diversion program, which was interesting in law. Then you have Chicago suing Jussie Smollett to recoup their costs under the false statement ordinance. Then you had the Osundairo brothers suing not Jussie Smollett, but his lawyers for defamation. Then you had Jussie Smollett suing to change venue. Then you had Jussie Smollett suing for malicious prosecution. I mean, it itself could be one semester of legal class of how the system works. And then, underlying all that, political corruption in Chicago and whatever. But I think it's been ingrained into the memory of the collective. So even though the media is not covering it, people are never going to forget this story, and they're never going to
No,
forget what it represents.
no, yeah. I imagine that we're kind of digging out a couple of cases that people, that the media, like you mentioned, they are ashamed and they would like everybody to forget.
And who's
Uh,
the host of Family Feud? Uh, hey Siri, who hosts Family Feud? Everybody's phone now is going to go crazy. Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey was also all in with Jussie Smollett, and and people on The View, people in the media who backed Jussie Smollett all got very badly embarrassed because of this, and I think that everyone just wants to forget about it. But they got embarrassed not because Jussie Smollett was not telling the truth. They got embarrassed because of their propensity to believe that which was unbelievable
absolutely.
to anyone who would have thought about it a little more critically. Or maybe it still would have been believable, but maybe they would have slowed down with jumping on the support bandwagon just to make sure. But that's what political bias tends to do, is it tends to motivate you or give you the impetus to jump on bandwagons more reflexively than critically thinking for a second. But a lot of people got embarrassed about that and never want to talk about it again.
Well, yeah. And it's funny because the same way they want to bring some very emotional cases, there is a lot of other news and media people that are being shut down. And what is the next topic is as relevant and rebel news, because you have, I remember when you first talk about that, you actually just giving an advice, like publicly advice from Viva Frei vlog, know your vlog, to rebel. And they still on the media as dealing with some type of censorship or cancel culture. And now Ezra is fighting because of his book, and
No, Ezra,
it's definitely is like a political, it's all about what we're talking now. So
and I said this to Ezra. Ezra is, Ezra is looking for fights, but the world needs people. Whether you like it or don't like it, the world needs people who look for fights to test the freedoms that we have. And with it was the injunction with Ezra Levant where he was denied press creds to attend the federal elections debates by the Commission d'Élection Fédérale, and he took an injunction to get accreditation to be able to attend the debates. And so that vlog was interesting in that it illustrated, we talked about injunctions, provisional, interlocutory injunctions. It was interesting because we could actually read through the proceedings, what you have to prove to get an injunction issued, balance of inconvenience, irreparable harm, etc. It was an interesting case. And why they were denied press creds or press credentials, because they were deemed to be advocacy journalism by this whatever committee decides who gets cred and who doesn't, the credentials. And it's an interesting question. Either he is or he isn't advocacy journalism. So either if he isn't, the decision is even more unjustifiable. Even if he is advocacy journalism, what does that mean? Like, is the CBC not advocacy journalism in that they are financed by the very government entities that they are supposed to be reporting on? Are they not advocates for the people that are paying their bills? So it's interesting questions. And he looked for the fight, he got the fight, and it proved a good point at the end. With his book on Trudeau, which got him in trouble with the Federal Elections Committee, I forget the name, where they said, that he had to get authorization to put up banners to promote the book because it was deemed to be political campaigning. I mean, he certainly is showing how a system can be politicized against the power's ideological adversaries. And these, the world needs people like him. It's just because he tests the rules, and whether or not you believe in what he's doing on any given issue, it keeps a balance and it keeps power in check.
yeah, and I think it's more about like you mentioned, is about testing freedom. Because even if he was saying, like, if it's a fictional book or if it is a political real book, why would you not be allowed to do it?
And
So
if he wants to test the rules as they're being implemented, let the world know what the rules are, and if it's outrageous enough to the general public, that's what you have elections for. That's what you have laws for. The ones he's doing now are fight the fines, where the guy in the Tim Hortons who got a fine for sitting in his car and not leaving when an officer asked him. For who was the other one? There was another one who got his own lawyer got. Yeah, I'm fairly certain it's his lawyer. His lawyer got an $800 ticket for having a backyard barbecue in defiance of social distancing guidelines. The same week, you have Prime Minister Trudeau attending a mass protest, with tens of thousands of people. So it exposes the inconsistencies in the applications of the law, to put it politely. It exposes hypocrisy, to put it more bluntly. But he looks for fights. They're not, even if he's looking for fights, he's making points. And now he's mandating a lawyer to deal with the two Michaels who are being held in China, who have been held there for 600, apparently close to 2 years. Most Canadians don't know about it. So at the very least, love him or hate him, he's making people smarter. You have to approach everyone with the same skepticism as to narrative and to bias, but he's bringing up issues that the CBC is not bringing up.
Yeah, I actually think that should be the point of even themselves, to propaganda themselves. Like, look, we are doing we're not doing I'm sorry, I said propaganda because I keep thinking in Portuguese, but advertising themselves as that they are not a propaganda machine, but news that are trying to bring the news that the mainstream media is not covering. It's very comforting for the politicians to have this news that never brings anything uncomfortable about them, that doesn't point any mistake.
No, but can you imagine? I mean, how wonderful it is to have a media on your side that any one politician can get away with multiple scandals, any one of which would have sunk any other politician if the media was against that politician. I mean, it is. I have siblings who live in the States, and so they live in that system, and they see what a hostile media does to a politician. I say, you got to look in Canada and see what a friendly media does to a politician, because we're not. Neither of these worlds are right. There should be some balance, but the problem in Canada is you're not going to get a hostile media to the government that's funding you to the tune of $1.5 billion. It wouldn't make sense. So you have to have controlled anger, you have to have selective anger, but you don't have the incessant, meticulous scrutiny that you would have if it were a political adversary who wanted to defund the CBC, for example, in power.
Yeah, I always end up with any discussion when we enter politics and media. And my sister is a journalist, and she's more leftist, so she's for unions. She's for government incentivizing culture, injecting money into media to help, because people need culture in that way. And I was like, but you don't see how that actually manipulates the media, because if you're receiving money from the government, I doubt you're going to say anything bad about it.
No, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. But I think this, I mean, as far as it goes even for the arts, I understand the value. The balance is artistic expression is one thing, but when it comes to certain issues, I think the marketplace should determine what makes its way to the top and what survives, and not necessarily government subsidies to prop up media organizations that don't succeed on their own merit, or that would fail on their own merit. And so, and then the unfair treatment is some outlets get the financing and don't have to compete, don't have to produce, whereas the ones that don't get it not only have to produce to stay afloat, but they have to seek some sort of crowd support to make up for what they're not able to get that the others are getting for free. So it falsifies the market entirely. And when the market should be a merit-based market, as it should be in media, as far as I'm concerned, it denatures the market.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you should have anything. I'm for a smaller government, so I'm very more into libertarian. That I agree. What I think is what we're doing now, it's kind of wrong, because the government got too big and is controlling too much. So we would have to step back a lot, including on the arts, maybe not have this financial incentive.
Well, I mean, I made the joke on Twitter that government is the only entity that uses its own failures to justify its own expansion. So, when the government screws up, they gotta have a committee to see why they screwed up. They mandate a committee. They pay this committee. It's madness. When the prime minister commits an ethics breach, they've got to hold hearings to listen to the breach. They got to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars.
They just extend more.
Yeah, and it's not even just Trudeau. It's former prime ministers as well. You spend more in these committee hearings to determine that it was unlawful to take $100,000 gift than the gift itself. And it's just like government is like the blob. It just keeps growing. And
Exactly.
it has a specific function. It has a specific need. It has specific things that it's good at. But other than that, an all-expansive government, it leads to certain problems. Corruption is the biggest of which, or the most obvious of which.
Yeah. And unhappily, we end up with all this structure that now can be called racist or whatever, and people see as government something that is disembodied of people, that is not made of people anymore. It's like it's an entity against people. And it's like, no, but the government is made of people. So we need to fix that on the roots, I believe, in reducing the government to fix corruption and and reduce the crying of people, because people are just whining and crying and not really doing much
There's
about it.
a good expression. I think it was Mark Twain. I'll have to Google it. But the expression was, when you fight corruption, corruption fights back. And so like you get a big corrupt government, and it doesn't relinquish power all that quickly. But no, but the issue with the government itself, it has a need, it has a use, but it should not be viewed as the crutch by which or the crutch or the instruction by which individuals should live their lives. And that's sort of, this whole pandemic situation is really getting close to illustrating the fine line, the blurred line, or the free fall between individual liberty and the government mandate.
Yeah, that is something interesting, because just last week I entered one of the street epistemology conversations, and we went all the way down, because I'm against forced masks. I'm not against masks. Whoever wants to wear masks, please put their mask, go outside. We use mask inside the car, use mask inside the house, use mask sleeping. I don't want to stop people from wearing masks. I just don't want to be forced to wear the mask. So going through this conversation, and uh, people invited me for this meeting, and I was putting my libertarian position that I, not just for not forcing people to wear masks, I'm against the government fining us when you don't wear seatbelts, or or telling you to not drink, or extra taxing cigarettes, or banning drugs. I'm for like legalizing all the drugs, or decriminalize the drugs at least.
Well,
And
I may agree with you on some of those, not on others.
yeah,
So my wife is a neuroscientist, and I have discussions with a number of people on the science of this. I mean, I don't really attack the science, but I attack the law side of this. And so the analogy that always comes up in this debate, if you're anti-mask mandates, are you also anti-seatbelt? And to which I respond, most people don't know this. The constitutionality of seatbelts was challenged before the courts. There were people who said it's unconstitutional for anybody to tell me what I have to wear in my car. And it lost ultimately because the correlation between the effectiveness of the measure, the minimal invasiveness of the measure, and the effectiveness was a justifiable limit. So they say it's minimally invasive, it's extremely efficient, and it can be justified under the first article of the charter, our charter, which is, you can exercise your rights, and they can only be limited insofar as justifiable in a free society. So I say, look, to the extent, if there's science that comes out that shows the masks are as efficient as, not necessarily as efficient as seatbelts, but sufficiently efficient that the measure can be justified in terms of its efficiency and effectiveness, okay. And that's all I'm saying is, at some point it will be challenged, and you're not anti-science because you're pro-constitution. It's just a question of making sure they both merge together. The problem that I've seen with the face masks, or the mandatory face masks, is that it's ineffective even as a policy, because the most recent study that my wife sent me showed that 95%, showed that if 95% of the people wore face masks, transmission would be reduced by 30%. So let's even set aside fighting over the science. Let's accept that that's true. Before the mask mandate, before it was made illegal not to wear one, I think you were basically at those levels of public participation anyhow. And even under the law as drafted, there's an exception in the law, at least in Quebec and elsewhere, medical exemption, anxiety exemption, in Oregon, I think it was Oregon, they had a racial exemption which caused people to freak out, and they undid that exemption. But
that.
you have exemptions, and if anybody doesn't know this, I'm pretty sure it was Oregon, where they had a racial exemption because of stigma for wearing something over your face for African Americans. Mm-hmm. And people, how is this possible? And they eliminated that exemption. But there are exemptions under the law, even as drafted, that will still allow for a certain percentage of the people, honestly or dishonestly, to exempt themselves from wearing masks. So the making it a law is not actually going to make it any more efficient in terms of public participation, as far as I can tell, based on the participation as of before. And all it does is it leads to escalations of problems and misunderstandings, where you see people getting pepper sprayed into Tim Hortons because he's not wearing a mask. Police come to enforce what they think the law says, which most don't even know what it says. There's misunderstandings for whatever the reason, and it results in somebody getting pepper sprayed in the face in an enclosed area in a Tim Hortons to enforce the law that never really needed to be a law because of the participation levels in any event. So making these things laws, I'm not sure it's arguable whether or not it makes them more widely followed in public. It just leads to conflict, it leads to stigma, and it leads to issuance of fines, which is not necessarily motivated by or correlating to compliance and the end result being reducing the transmissions in any meaningful manner.
I agree with you. And actually, what I found out in this other conversation is that they brought me to think, why Corona, as an infectious disease that is no worse than other disease that we had before, is being taken politically in this way. It's like, because in the end of the conversation, the only thing I faced was the wall that's like, okay, so we do have more dangerous disease that are also infectious, and we have not dealt with those diseases in this way, to like prosecute people and put people in jail or force people to wear masks. So why Corona now is being treated differently from the other disease before? Or are we gonna retrospectively go back and then now, oh no, tuberculosis and all the other infectious disease, we're gonna start applying the same laws that we were doing on Corona?
Well, those two arguments there. I think the response to the first one is that people widely accept that coronavirus is, I know there's an argument among people, it's widely accepted, it is worse than the flu, it's more communicable, its R factor is greater, its fatality factor is greater. That's the argument. So it's different with coronavirus. But the flip side to that is going to be, okay, well, let's just say that the coronavirus is 5 times more deadly than the flu, or 10 times. Now that you've created this precedent where you can mandate on the general population face masks for a virus with a fatality rate of whatever, now do you not do it for the other ones? There were in 2018, I think there were 60 some odd thousand deaths from the flu in the United States, and that's not to undermine coronavirus. Let's just let's increase concern for the ordinary flu. Is it going to be then, if it's a bad flu season, we come in with these mandates, face masks? That's. Everyone talks about a slippery slope, but at some point, like the joke was the slippery slope with the removal of statues and Jamie Oliver, not Jamie Oliver. Oh, what's that? The late night show guy's name? Not Jamie Oliver. John Oliver.
John Oliver.
John Oliver said to Trump, like, oh, the slippery slope. Are we going to be taking down George Washington statues? The slippery slope ends when it ends. Well, no. Now we've seen 2 years after that comment, they've gone after the very example of the end of the slippery slope that John Oliver thought existed 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But so that's the precedent. And now the precedent is, we don't even have the criteria, but the government can mandate what you can wear on your face when you go out in public. The government can mandate when you can go out in public based on, at the very least, incomplete or evolving data of a current virus. That's the precedent. It's no longer a slippery slope. The question is going to be, in law, how is this going to be applied in the future to other similar but different situations? And the precedent has been set.
Yeah. My problem with the Corona is just because I think we're being too, just what happened with the Kavanaugh case. I think the media, the politics, and even the people are jumping into the conclusion that the science, because I'm a scientific person, I'm a physician, but I understand that science is not accurate. Actually, we get that accuracy as a pendulum, and that's how we saw they moving from you not don't use mask, use mask, and don't use mask, or use some specific mask, and we still like right now fighting for a mask that uh, medically speaking doesn't protect from infection. So actually that's my point. It's like, oh,
Well,
it's just wear a mask. It's just to put something on your face and feel that you protected.
well,
For me it feels like well, go home and pray and you're going to be protected, and just be
there's, there,
brave.
I mean, the law as drafted says any face cloth properly fitted. And the funny anecdote is I went into the pool, the municipal pool the other day, and I had to walk through the building. I said, I don't have a mask. Can I wrap my towel around my face? And she said, no, it has to be a mask. I was like, I'm not fighting with you, but I know that it doesn't have to be a mask. It can be a towel. I can put my shirt up like this. And then the issue is, yeah, like if you're using a scarf, what is the protective measure? I think the bottom line idea is it does something. It obviously, if I spit,
I understand it's better. And that was my point. It's like, I understand that it's better you have something on your face than to not have anything. If you spitting, talking, coughing, sneezing, but in the same way, I actually would even argue with people that the mask could increase the risk of infection because people touch their face much more when they are wearing the mask. And that's something scientifically we don't know. So why people would jump in the conclusion that is like, yeah, wear a mask is more protective and you should force everybody to wear, when we know that, I actually like to say, like, look, eggs, we have been talking about eggs for the last 30, 40 years. Is it good to eat eggs? One egg a day, two eggs a day? No, eat egg, don't eat egg. Every 2, 3 years it changes. And right now for Corona, that they just found out, everything accurate from
no,
like the first the first studies, and everybody just jump in the conclusion. Yeah, I believe that. It's like, what up? Where is that little bit of skepticism in science?
the skepticism can be there. The issue is just going to be from a policy perspective. Until we know, let's just be the safest possible, which I can appreciate. But
Yeah,
the issue is once something becomes a law, on the one hand, it becomes a law, and the government tends to use it to, on the one hand, cynically line their coffers. Montreal gave out thousands of tickets for not social distancing in open parks. Now when the science comes out and says, well, yeah, we'll see what the science says about that later on. Who are they targeting for these tickets? By and large, people who look like they're going to pay them. When they come out with the face masks, sure, the face masks, it's logical. If you have something over your face, if I spit, it's going to block some of the spit. The issue then, it goes back to the seatbelts. What is the efficiency of the measure compared to the measure itself? And then if it reduces your chances, I mean, ultimately, if your chances are 1 in a million without it and reduced somewhat with it, is that the new standard for something that is effectively, a
yeah.
crucial
Yeah, I
infringement?
think it's the next step, because the law, not the law, the science is already over. The studies are all over this, because there are states where there were lockdown and measures more than others. So now they are being able to measure this relative risk. And I guess I've heard that some places on lockdown, people were getting more infected. 60% of people in lockdown getting infected. So
That's another.
it's
That's another interesting point in fact and in law. The majority of the communication of the virus is from within the home, and I mean that might just be as a matter of fact because most people are not going out. So fine, right? There's a logical reason why that's the case. But then the question is going to be: do they mandate masks in your own home? And they were talking about doing it, and they're talking about doing it in Florida. And is that something that we want to accept the government to tell us what we can do in our own homes? And then the bottom line is risk versus reward. Like this is, I've had people falsely analogizing the risk of coronavirus to the risk of speeding down a crowded street, and it's an interesting thing because even following that analogy, first of all, it just fails on its face because of the sheer risk value. But at some point, we agree you can still drive down the street. You can still drive at a certain speed down the street, even if that speed would be fatal if you hit someone. So we've assessed the risks versus the freedoms we want to have. Now the question is only when it comes to how to apply them to this particular situation. Are we living in a world now where the government can shut down the economy, tell us to literally put us on house arrest, which is unconstitutional, but can be justified if the emergency measure so requires, what we can wear in our own house in some states? If this is the new normal over this particular risk, is there any risk that can justify this new normal? That's the fundamental freedom question about this.
Yeah, yeah. And would you be standing on one of the sides more, because apparently it's creating a wrong, it's a false dichotomy that is being created nowadays, as all the other strawmans on any controversial discussion that splits both sides. It's like people keep saying, "Oh, like, are you pro individual freedom or are you pro health, public health?" Because now you have to pick a side.
Well, you have to pick. It is the first thing is one of the arguments as to why the masks are actually destructive is that it causes people to think they can actually get closer together than they could because they're wearing the mask. That's one argument, but that just means that you just have to do both and not think that one takes precedence over the other. But no, I am more of a rights person in terms of just make sure that the infringement is absolutely necessary and proportionate and effective. I'm a lawyer, so if the infringement is minimal, but it's also minimally effective, I would not accept that as the new standard for what the government can tell me to do. With the seatbelts or with drunk driving, these were not questionable correlations. They were massive correlations. Overnight, with the seatbelts, fatalities were reduced by multiple fold. Then the question is, okay, even if I recognize that wearing a mask would reduce the risk by 3%, 30%, it will reduce it by a certain percent. What percent is the fair percent that would justify the measure? Because life is nonetheless about risk, and if the risk, if I accept the reduction of risk to justify them for coronavirus, am I implicitly recognizing that risk for the flu next season, or for that's where it goes. But the issue is constitutionally, it has the infringement or the limitation has to be proportionate. It has to be as narrowly circumscribed as possible, and above all else, it has to be causally effective to the ends that are being sought. And if it's not, even if it's minimally invasive, it's not justifiable.
Yeah, I don't know if this is right to think about law, but I kind of came out with this trying to argue with people against the forced masks. And my argument was like that the government and the law was actually something created to protect ultimately the individual, that is the smallest minority. And that I would not agree with the law, the justice harming people with the excuse of protecting them. And my analogy would be like finding someone whatever money for not wearing the mask is this preventive, not I don't think this, it's a preventive measure from the government harming you from protecting you from your own choice. When I thought the government was actually, or the law was made to punish people when they commit some harm, when they cause some harm. So it needs an evidence.
Well, the question, so I mean, what you meant to say is like, is the fine is itself punitive but not preventative, and so it has nothing to do with preventing at that point. It has to do with punishing disobedience. My major issue with all of this is it becomes the Parkinson's law of triviality on a government scale, where the government now is micromanaging areas that are not the bulk of the problem. And so they're micromanaging mandatory face masks in partially covered open areas as though that's where the massive amounts of transmission are coming from, while not actually, while in New York State sending patients that have tested positive back to old person homes, while in Canada, while having old person's homes, and I should say not just that, but long-term healthcare facilities that don't have the proper measures. And in Canada, something like 90% of transmission and fatalities are originating or revolving around long-term healthcare facilities. So you're micromanaging and issuing massive fines, $800 under this new law. It's $400 to $6,000 for not wearing a mask into Tim Hortons, as though that is the bulk of where the transmission is coming from. So you're taking a sledgehammer to kill a fly, and the fly's in another room, and you're breaking down the living room when the fly's in the kitchen. And it's like, it's just bad policy. On the one hand, it's bad policy that makes you feel safer, but doesn't actually contribute to resolving the actual problem. In Canada and in the US, the bulk of the cases have specific situations in which they're originating. And so we're over-regulating in other areas and incidentally not even really resolving the problem. That's what drives me nuts about all of this. And then the argument becomes pro or against face masks. It's like, all right, well, how about we just worry about the people who are dying in long-term healthcare facilities because at the time they didn't have face masks themselves and they didn't have PPE. And but lo and behold, the cops are walking around Mount Royal giving tickets to people who are not 2 meters apart from each other in public. Okay,
Thank
if
you so much.
policy.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. Yeah, I totally agree. And I have talked to my mother. My mother-in-law lives in Montreal. And they are 60s and 70s. Her husband, and they are really afraid. And we had discussions, arguing actually about all this because they're just afraid. And I understand their fear, and I
Yeah.
understand they want masks and they don't want to go out. But I'm also mad at mainstream media and the government to manipulate and manage so badly, just like you mentioned, because
Well,
it's easy to let all the old people die like they did and then increase the death rate number, the percentage, scare everybody, and now force everybody from of wearing masks that will not even protect the people that we already lost and even the people that we will probably still lose on the bad policies.
I would not. It might be losing in something in translation. I wouldn't suggest the government's letting it happen on purpose to
Oh
justify.
no, not on purpose. It was something that was about the time.
No,
It
no,
was
that's it.
about just
But and that's it. It's like
it was timing.
you have these numbers which are what they are, and we
No,
now.
also there is something about the numbers because there's a lot of people talk about like, but the numbers of death in general in this Corona time, and it's like, yeah, but there is a lot of numbers that are being. I just watched yesterday a doctor talking about how they are computing the number uh, of infected people by just tests, even if the person takes four tests, he is computed as four different patients instead of one patient. You know?
Yeah, that I wouldn't get into that discussion because we know
Yeah.
that there's be people who say the numbers are inflated. We know there's going to be people who are going to say that even if the numbers are X for coronavirus deaths, the deaths for people now because of the lockdown. There was a
There is
study.
some financial incentive
Well,
for having corona in the
well,
hospitals.
I mean, in the hospitals in the States, yeah, there was that argument as well, is that you get to invoice the federal government for a patient who's diagnosed and on a respirator or whatever. No, but also out of the UK, there was a study coming out to show the deaths that are resulting from the lockdowns for premature deaths for not getting certain treatments. But separate issue.
Yeah, the people with cardiac surgeries or cancer patients that died from not getting their treatment.
It's there's going to
Yeah.
be a trade-off that people were not that people that there's a trade-off that doesn't fit into the discussion because it's too nuanced and it's actually sort of
Yeah.
it's a meticulous discussion. But we're going to see the effects of this. There's no question. Later down the line, it's just going to be a question of what the effects are. But no, in Canada, you know how many deaths we've had in Canada so far?
No.
Under 9,000, 8,860 as of yesterday. And I'm looking at other countries that have the most radical lockdown measures for public areas. Philippines had under 2,000 deaths as of yesterday for a population of 109 million. And so Canada's doing very well. It's had I say that nonetheless. I mean, 9,000 people is a lot of people.
It's a lot. Yeah.
90% and the vast majority of them originated in or around long-term healthcare facilities because they didn't have the PPE they needed in the beginning when we knew there was a problem. Policy decisions that have killed people. And now if you look at the flattening of the curve argument and you look at the curves, we're at the flattest point now. And now they're talking about these draconian measures, keeping the border closed, mandatory face masks, where the bulk of the fatalities resulted from government inadequacies months ago. And like I said, government is the only institution that expands their powers because of their own failures. So I chalk the deaths up to the government response, the terrible situations at the long-term healthcare facilities, the fact that we didn't have what we needed when we needed it, and now lo and behold, 6 months later, we're still under restrictive measures, and the government's expanding its powers in areas that were not the actual source of the fatalities in the first place. That's bad policy. But
Yeah, actually, I would like to mention that the thing on the old house, the people in the old house that died in the first wave, actually did not seem to be something that the government or anybody could do anything about it. were pretty much inevitable because of the timing. They were really the first people to be infected by the early spring break, and I don't see how we could even save those people actually.
Well, I
So
mean,
I don't want to blame anybody.
no, hindsight's 2020, but I know for personal experience, and I know because people contact me that a number of these places they didn't have PPE and they couldn't get PPE in time, and so what it would have been. We can always play what would have been, but what we know is where it happened. We know what resources they lacked. We knew where there were outbreaks and where the actual focus should have been. And we can see it in the States. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that certain policies were contributing to a certain problem. But that's it. It's easy to play Monday morning quarterback and whatever. All that. It's only really to address these policies which are becoming increasingly more stringent. With I don't know what the effective rate is what the effectiveness is of these measures, and whether or not they can be saved as under the Charter, under the Constitution, as justifiable limitations, given their efficiency and what the effect they produce. We'll see if anyone challenged it. In the States, they're challenging it. In Canada, we seem a little more passive, and we're not, and we do it. And smaller population.
Canadians are very educated and polite, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, sorry. I'm sorry. I'll put my mask."
And it's what you wear the mask. I mean, I wear the mask in public as well. I wear it in public. I wear it to go to the stores when I have to go, and I'm not going to make a statement one way or the other, but it doesn't mean you can't have the discussion, and it doesn't mean that anybody who wants to have the discussion is committing blasphemy. The people making a political point by deliberately not wearing it, then we're getting into even according to the stats.
But is that something that is where is the line that should be drawn on the case of the mask, the pepper spray guy? The civil disobedience is something that should go, like the police is justified to do what he did.
The problem with the Tim Hortons guy, it's not even clear that it was an act of civil disobedience, but let's accept that it was an act of civil disobedience. Okay, then the question is, it's an act of civil disobedience. It carries with it whatever risk one thinks is carries with an individual not wearing a mask. Okay, are we minimizing that risk or exacerbating that risk by pepper spraying the guy and everyone else in there? Are we exacerbating what we think is the actual risk for him not wearing a mask? Spray him in the face with pepper spray, make him cough all over the place, make everyone else in the restaurant cough all over the place, as opposed to how do you deal with that type? Take for granted it was civil disobedience. How do you deal with it? One thing might be...
And because I actually put as being a civil disobedience, because some people actually already jumped on the conclusion that what he did was a civil disobedience, but it was just like not following a private business rule.
People make a lot of assumptions. Everyone's saying the business can make its own rules. From what I understand, all the businesses are implementing the regulation. The regulation provides for exceptions for not wearing a mask. So I don't know if this guy had a medical condition and he didn't want to say it. I don't know if he was making a point. And incidentally, one of the other police officers was not wearing a mask. From the looks of it, other people in the establishment weren't wearing a mask. Were they drinking their coffee at the time and therefore it's justifiable under the law? I mean, this is the problem when you have a law that admits to this. But the bottom line, take for granted, he's the biggest jerk on earth. He's making a political point and he's being a stubborn, selfish ass. Okay, what's the risk of that versus pepper spraying him in the face and making him cough all over the place? And in the odd and likely event he had a medical condition, I mean, right now we're not talking about preventative, we're talking about punitive. And he was not pepper spray. Anybody who thinks that it's okay to pepper spray him in the face, especially from the video, it was after 37 seconds. So anybody who thinks that we can go from 0 to pepper spray in 37 seconds, that's not in the Canada that I've envisioned in my mind. But even if it was a pure civil disobedience, jerk, selfish thing to do, does pepper spraying him in the face make it worse or better? And what is the way to deal with that if it's one guy in a Tim Hortons where he could have otherwise been justified in not wearing a mask had he had his coffee? I mean, this is why it's just more laws, less justice is the expression. And because when you have these ambiguous laws, the law enforcement don't know how to enforce them. Everything quickly escalates to a question of principle and authority. And listen to the police or you get pepper sprayed, which is what a lot of comments on the video were saying. That's not my vision of Canada. Being on the stairs. Okay.
Yeah, someone's gonna come to call you. It's more than an hour.
And
Yeah, and I'm gonna let you go.
call it quits. 2 minutes.
No, I'm gonna let you go. Yeah, say sorry to your family. I'm holding it for too long. So the only thing I'm gonna tell you guys that we would talk about the McCloskeys, but in gun control, but you guys go check Viva video later today, and I wanted to just to mention that we would talk about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell because I wanted to ask you about that something. Uh, but I'm gonna just tell you guys to go check
Oh, the live
louder. Yeah,
Barnes. I put up a live stream highlight yesterday with Robert Barnes where we talked about the bail issue in Maxwell.
that is pretty good. Not trying to go over any conspiracy theory with Viva, but just for people that still question, like, does did Epstein kill himself? I would say, like, go watch it. Louder with Crowder. He did make a nice experiment trying a few ways that he could have done what he did. Have you seen that?
No, but I read the conflicting coroner reports though. I mean, I read the news, and people are entitled to their opinions, and some opinions are more well documented by evidence than others. We can leave it at that.
No, just no, but I can. If you don't want, you don't need to answer. Would you give your personal opinion about Epstein?
That my
Or you think it's too controversial?
No, my personal opinion's useless, and this is why I don't make suppositions on things that I will never be able to prove.
Yeah,
it is inconceivable. There's too many coincidences that line up to allow what happened to be an accident. I mean, it's crazy. It's either gross negligence or it's murder. I mean,
we can't tell.
But we'll never know definitively. But accidents, when there is what's the word? A sequence of coincidences, it ceases. It becomes exponentially impossible that it's a sequence of a comedy of errors. But
I see.
And when people were predicting what was going to happen before it happened,
it's usually what I like to say about people saying that Trump does everything as a mistake, but he gets everything right every time. It's like, wow, that's amazing. It's that clown that actually sleeps in the banana, does like 4, flips on the air and stands on his foot, and everybody was like, oh, it was just an accident.
No, but with Epstein, I mean, you have a coroner coming out and saying what they said, that the injury to the neck was more akin to murder than suicide. Cameras going dead, someone under maximum security. It's some things become progressively more and more inconceivable the more accidents that happen. The more accidents. And
I agree with you, mainly because I also read the entire Epstein report on the autopsy and definitely it's that thing is like it is not that it's impossible to happen, but it's so less likely to be this type of injury in this case that it raised eyebrows. So let's leave for the public to stir this up. Thank you very much, Viva. Was such a pleasure.
The public knows what they believe already, and they don't necessarily believe what they're being told.
Yeah, but that is something interesting because maybe for the mainstream media or for the media in general to acknowledge that there is no such a thing as actually manipulating people that far. No. They think they have more power than they actually have.
And people are realizing it, and that's why alternative sources of information are becoming more and more popular, which is why it is becoming more and more important to regulate the internet. But that is a discussion for another day.
Yeah, that definitely is. Viva, please let people know how they can follow and support your channel. I know you have a Patreon and a lot of merch.
Viva Frei. Go to YouTube channel is the only one. Share my videos.
That's right. Thank you very much, and see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much. Viva, can you do your close, your booyah?
Yeah. Now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah.
Perfect. I'll stop recording.